Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to talk about, lots to get to. Today was the day when airport workers across the country, Orlando, LAX, Denver, Atlanta, Phoenix, all across the country, well, they got out on the picket line and they protested the crummy working conditions, the terrible wages, all of that stuff from top to bottom, from all of the jobs in the airports. And again, this is the kind of mass solidarity, the mass coming together that, well, it's been a long, long time coming. And something that we've been talking about here on the show, well, all 17 years that we've been doing this. This idea that the work that you do, the labor that you engage in, the wealth that you create from that labor, you should share it. And you should be able to make a dignified living. You should be able to support yourself, your family off of that labor. And that every job can be and should be a reasonable living wage job. You know, as we're putting together this tour that we're about to embark on this coming Friday, I keep coming back to this frame and the people that I've been talking to as we're organizing this, and as we're talking to people all across the states that we're going to be going through. The one thing they keep coming back to are those union factory jobs, those union manufacturing jobs, those jobs with good wages and health care, retirement security and job security and community security. You know, they keep coming back to that. And my mind keeps going back to this place where I know those were not good jobs until they were union jobs. You know, the truck driving job that I've done my entire career was not a good job until it was a union job. And how do I know that? Well, I know that because my grandfather, when he started making 17 cents an hour shoveling coal off the back of a coal truck, 15, 16 hours a day with no overtime, none of that stuff. Backbreaking work for poverty, desperation wages. And the only reason they made it is because he was stealing coal to be able to heat his own home. You know, the dignity of being able to buy his own coal and the dignity to be able to make the way. This is the moment that I'm glad to see all of these workers protesting, and it's spread nationwide. And we're going to see more of this because it's about time. It is about time. So good on them. I'm glad to see it. Good stuff. I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. Now, the president. Today, the president spoke from the Rose Garden saying that, look, Social Security, that safety net for our seniors, that anti-poverty program for seniors, that's once again on the chopping blocks if Republicans take Congress. And look, it is. He's not wrong. He's not wrong because, you look at the Florida Senator Rick Scott, who came out with his 11, 12, I'm not sure how many point plan we're up to now, but he wants to sunset every federal program every 5 years. And do you really think, stop and think about this for a second. And I'm talking about to the people who are on Social Security and Medicare right now, and people are hoping to get there very soon. Do you really think that this Republican Party, these folks right now, the Mitch McConnells, the Rick Scotts, the Ron Johnsons, the Ted Cruzes, the Marco Rubios, do you really think they are going to reauthorize and re-up Social Security? Socialism? Do you really think they're going to do that? Do you think they're going to allow Medicare to come back? National insurance for seniors? Do you really think that that's a possibility? No, it's not. They have been wanting, dreaming, fantasizing, fetishizing the day when they can kill off those programs and make seniors and working people desperate again. And I know they keep telling us, no, we just don't believe in government programs. No, we're going to hand it over to the private sector so they can rob you blind. I go back to what my high school government teacher said, oh, so many years ago. And I find that bit, when I asked, how do you know which side, which hat to wear, which team to be on, which party to belong to? And he said, well, at the end of the day, Republicans are going to be about policies that help make the wealthy in corporate America stronger. They're for the rich. Democrats are going to be for policies that are going to help the poor. You have to decide, as people somewhere in the middle, which you're closer to, rich or poor, because you're going to pay for both of them. And he wasn't wrong. And this is one of those moments where Social Security, while you go, well, if I were smart and I could, a handful of people would do much better investing money on their own. A handful would. The mass would probably do a little worse. And a good number would do horribly worse. But understand, the Social Security Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund is not about making people rich and millionaires. It's about a baseline. It's about a floor under our feet. It's about drawing a line in the sand and saying, you know what? We're not going to let Granny die on the street corner. We're not going to allow our seniors to struggle and suffer in poverty. We've seen that movie. I know it's been years since we've seen it, but it's in our past. We're not going to do it again. Now, the reality is the fund is in trouble. In fact, by 2034, it's only going to be able to pay out 77 cents on the dollar that it's owed. And then it will pay that out on infinitum. Medicare, in trouble by 2028. And it's because, and this is not new, not news. This has been decades in the making. We've seen this coming. This has been one of those things you go, hey, maybe we should do something about this. And this is, again, where politicians have been kicking it down the road, and not addressing it. And Biden's finally talking about, hey, we got to fix this. We got to do something. Now, the answer to me is very simple. We have created the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization. We have given them an enormous amount of wealth. It's time that they start kicking in, especially by the fact that most of them don't pay into Social Security because, well, they make their income in other ways. It's time to expand on what income is. We need to expand the definition of income to where we tax them as well. They contribute to the system of Social Security, security for everyone in our society. The giant insurance program that makes sure that every working person doesn't fall below a certain line. And I've been a proponent of scrapping the cap for a very long time. I pay Social Security on every dime that I make. It doesn't make any sense that at noon on January 1st, we've got a bunch of people who that's the most that they're going to pay into it, if they pay anything. This is my view. Now, the Republicans have told us that they're going to save it. Going to save it. The GOP mentality of we have to kill it in order to save it. But that's what they're saying. And if you listen to them, you listen to the Ron Johnsons of the world. No. We don't want to destroy Social Security. No, we want to save it. Yeah, we want to save it. We want to save it by making it, a benefit that isn't really a benefit. We want to cut it down to the bone to where you can't exist on it. And it's what they've run on. Now, the weird thing is you get working people who, I don't know if they're not paying attention. I don't know if they don't think that it's them that are going to be affected by it. But Republicans are telling us who they are. They're the party of destroying Social Security and Medicare. Simple. And have been that for a very long time. This is not news. It's not new. It's not news. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It's who they are. It's who they've been from the start. From the day the program was proposed decades ago, passed, implemented, and at every turn they've opposed it. I don't know why now we would go, oh, gee, shocking that the party that hates working people would be against Social Security and Medicare. Wow, who could have known other than everyone? And I'm looking at this moment because, again, I keep saying that we're at a crossroads. We're at a crossroads right now, policy-wise, because, again, my view is policy created the middle class. Policy created that prosperous middle class of my grandparents' generation. And we did that through taxation, we did that through investment, and we did that through encouraging workers to band together and fight for better wages, hours, conditions. That's how we built that middle class. That's how my grandparents got to go from being homeless to leading a solidly American middle class existence with the white picket fence and retiring in their home and dying with dignity. A retirement that they got with a defined benefit pension, their savings, and Social Security, the three-legged stool. Well, Republicans in corporate America have already killed off the defined benefit pension. That's long gone. The savings of a generation's been whittled away because wages have been under attack and suppressed for decades. And now they're coming for the Social Security. And we've got an administration right now that's going, hey, we've got to do better. And in fact, one of the things that came out today is that the administration wants to end hunger. And I'm like, what? We're going to talk about ending hunger too? He wants to end hunger by 2030. And you go, that's only 8 years. That's really ambitious. How are you going to do that? Well, we're going to expand aid to families. Food. Wow, what a concept. We're going to give people food. My goodness. The last time we talked about about helping families, because the president's going to be hosting a conference on hunger this week. The first time we've done that since 1969. Over 50 years. Over 50 years. Richard Nixon did it back in 69. We're talking about, hey, how do we help people? That gave us the Women, Infant, and Children program, the WIC program, that helps over half of the babies born in this country. Over half. And we haven't talked about this in over 50 years. Finally, there's an administration that's going, you know what? We can deal with big problems. We can deal with the problems that are going on, and we can make things better. This is why I keep saying we're in a moment. We are in a moment where we are at a crossroads. We can continue down the path that the supply side voodoo Reaganomic folks, give the rich people all the money and let them decide what to do. The neoliberals that austerity is good, get those working people desperate and back to work for pennies. Or we can choose to return to a path that built the most prosperous time in American history or in global history for working people. To me, it's that simple. Now, again, they're going to distract us with all the other stuff. Oh, the border, the crime, blah, 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 blah. All kind of noise. But it comes back down to the kitchen table, man. It comes back down to that for me. Love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-7425. And I'll tell you, as somebody who grew up in a housing project, someone who remembers how difficult it was to get through a month on the pittance that was aid to dependent children, the ADC of the past, the precursor to TANF, which is just as horrible. We should be expanding these programs to help families. We should be expanding these programs to make sure that no child goes to bed hungry. We should be expanding these opportunities in the wealthiest country in the world at its wealthiest moment, and the wealthiest moment in history. It just seems like the Christian thing to do. And yet you don't hear our prosperity gospel, folks, lining up, do you? Quick break. Right back. Stick around. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Just seems simple to me. It seems like we're in a moment where this election matters. Let's go to the phone lines. We've got Colleen in Chicago on line 1. Colleen, how are we doing today?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Sure. What's on your mind?
Cool. I was just the Hunger March. The last time we actually had an actual march on Washington was when Martin Luther King was planning it right before he was assassinated, and it was for hunger and financial inequity. And I was almost as if that was the reason they murdered him more, because they did not want to have the equal. I just believe that people do not want to have, especially those in power, financial power, want to have a balance in with the working class, with individuals, to have equal food, equal pay, equal anything. They want to have a superiority of some sort.
No, I don't disagree with you. The second he started talking about Coke, and the second he started talking about equal opportunities and pay and an equal economy and opportunity, you're spot on right. I appreciate the thoughts.
Yeah, I'm a union family, and it's always been about working class. I used to once had a situation where I was at work, and I said, I'm a working class woman. And this woman said, you say that about yourself. I said, are you kidding? I'm proud of it. I said, because I'm part of the working class. We're the ones that built America.
Yep.
And we're more valuable than those that are just sort of leasing, so to speak.
Amen, sister.
But I love you.
Appreciate the call. Thanks so much, Colleen. Good stuff. Great stuff. No, she's absolutely spot on right. I mean, the reality is we've got, just spot on. Let's go to the line 2. We got Jeff in Atlanta on line 2. Jeff, how are we doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm sorry you didn't hear that last week. I'm my phone and what you are on two different dialects. But you remember the last time Alice was on, and she was talking about the police and the whole GOP. You know, they were once for family values. But it's like you said before, you know, family values were once when a guy could work a 40-hour week and spend time with his family, but now we got to spend 60 hours to make a 40-hour check.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the sad reality. And sadly, you know, I remember as a kid, you know, we had blue laws. Sundays were off. Sundays were family time. I would love to hear my prosperity gospel friends go, you know what? We want Sundays off. Nobody works. And this is where, as much as I don't like Chick-fil-A and I'm not fond of their politics, they at least live their values, and they're not open on Sundays. And I give them credit for that. Not much else, but I give them credit for that.
Right. You know, but Reagan screwed us all up. And, you know, with his whole, you know, screwing the unions, and you know, the one thing I like, you know, there was once a Trump guy who was, you know, against the 40-hour week, and you know, against the unions, blah blah blah, but the union stood for the 40-hour week, and if you worked more than your time, you got your time shared. You know.
Yep. No. I mean, the old fight for the 8-hour day, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what you will. We need to be fighting that again. Jeff, I appreciate the thoughts, man. Thanks so much.
Yep. Bye.
Good stuff. No, I mean, you know, we're right back in that moment, and you know, the hope is you know, we come back around. Let's go to Joey on line 3. Joey, how are we doing today?
Hey, how are you, Rick? Yeah. I'm down here in Florida getting ready for the storm. I just want to give a shout-out to the SPFPA my union and all the my union brothers and sisters and first responder unions who are going to be out here in Florida fighting the good fight. I also want to give a shout out to the IBEW and the infrastructure unions who keep us rolling every day. And I just want to say that a couple of years ago when we had another hurricane who came in here who knocked off the infrastructure, I didn't see that the lights didn't come back on until I saw IBEW trucks roll through town. So just give a shout out again to my union brothers and sisters who are going to be on the first line during this crisis or this storm and the other crisis that we face every day, and the other issues we face every day that the unions take care of. So again, guys, solidarity, and thanks, Rick, for what you do for the working class. Solidarity to you all.
Thanks so much, Joey, and stay safe, and make sure you stay safe and help some other folks. Good for you, man.
Thanks, brother. We'll do.
Solidarity, brother. No, this is my hope. My heart goes out to these folks preparing for this storm, and like you said, it's going to be those union workers who are going to roll in there, who are going to put their lives on the line, who are going to go out there and going to do the work to get things back up and rolling, and good on them as well. But this is where we need to be. This is where we need to be going, in this direction of working together. And when a storm happens, it shouldn't be political. It shouldn't be red hat, blue hat. It should be, hey, we're moving forward. We're going to take care of our neighbors and our friends and our families and strangers. And my thoughts going out to all the people who are in this storm's way. But again, this is another one of those moments. We've got to be dealing with what is coming, and what is coming are more of these storms. What's coming is the effects of climate change. What's coming is mass migration and all of the problems that are going to come out of this. And the question is, policy-wise, how are we going to move forward? For me, all of this comes back to what policies are you going to put forth? And sadly, our political system has become all about scoring points. Who gets over on who makes the best tweet, instead of going, what policies are going to make our lives better? And I'm looking at this administration right now, and I've said this 1,000 times. Joe Biden was not my first choice, but he has risen to the occasion. And he is moving in a direction that's taking us away from the path that we've been on for far too long, and moving this country in a direction that I think is going to be very positive if we maintain. I think we're at one of those 1980s kind of moments again. I think back to when I was a kid. Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House, talking about moving us in a different direction energy-wise. We were coming out of the OPEC crisis and all of that stuff, and the idea of moving in a different direction. And what was the first thing Reagan did when he took office? He ripped those panels off the White House and put an oil burner in. And that was more than just an act. That was symbolism. That was saying, you know what? For the next 42 years, this is what you're going to be saddled with. And here we are. That's why this election is so important. Just my thought. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally. Appreciate the calls. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Scott Paul from the Alliance for American Manufacturing is going to be here to share some thoughts on, some good manufacturing numbers. We're bringing jobs back. We're moving in the right direction. And you know what? We're going to make those manufacturing jobs good jobs. We're going to make them union jobs. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2011. That was the day hundreds of ILWU strikers blocked railroad tracks near Longview, Washington. They hoped to stop grain shipments from moving in and out of the EGT grain terminal. Longshoremen had been sitting down on the tracks throughout the summer, resulting in over 100 arrests. No trains had moved in or out of the terminal since July. But then a federal judge issued an injunction against ILWU pickets. The BNSF Railroad tried to move grain once again. ILWU picketers in Vancouver were able to hold off the train until police forcibly dispersed the crowd. Then, hundreds gathered at Longview to block the train from coming in. That's when police went on the offensive. They used clubs and pepper spray against the longshoremen, arresting 19. They threw ILWU President Bob McElrath to the ground.
Rumors spread that police had broken his arm. Hundreds of regional longshoremen rushed to Longview. The Seattle and Tacoma ports shut down in protest. The next morning, 10,000 tons of grain were opened onto the railroad tracks. The grain export terminal was the first to be built in the Pacific Northwest in almost 30 years. EGT hoped to undercut the powerful ILWU, who controlled operations at the port since its founding in the 1930s. The union refused to agree to work 12-hour shifts at straight time. The EGT hoped to break the hiring halt by refusing to recognize maintenance and inside workers at the terminal. They then attempted to fill jobs with workers from the operating engineers, but the ILWU persevered. By the end of January, EGT had backed off many of its demands, negotiations resumed, and days later, the contract was signed.
It's been a record year of runaway wealth for America's billionaires, with this tiny clique vastly widening the chasm separating them from us hoi polloi. For example, Amazon Hefe Jeff Bezos hauled in $190 billion for the year. That pays him more than $360,000 a minute for every single minute of the year. So much taken by so few, who do so little while harming so many. Bezos erected his corporate empire on the backs of non-union workers he routinely exploits, plus millions of taxpayers he bilks. Indeed, his recent surge of wealth comes not from innovation or hard work, but from the windfall of bloated Wall Street stock prices, making him richer without lifting a finger. Yet, media and politicians hail Jeff as a big-thinking genius. Seriously? This self-centered ego's top achievement this year was to have the world's largest super yacht built for him, a 400-foot-long seagoing palace. But, oops, Jeff's pleasure craft can't get to the ocean because it's too tall to go under a bridge just downriver from the Dutch city where he's having it built. No problem for a billionaire genius, though. Boss Bezos simply instructed local officials to dismantle their historic bridge so his toy could pass through. But no go, for outraged locals learned of his imperious scheme and quickly organized a massive rotten egg brigade, pledging to pelt the colossal yacht and possibly Jeff. Very bad political optics. So the American mogul's billions were not allowed to buy his way out. This is Jim Hightower saying, it's still unclear how he'll get it out to sea, but one Dutch wag helpfully pointed out to him, you can still take your giant boat out for short trips down to the bridge and back. If these mega-rich privileged ones are so smart, why are they so stupid?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a bipartisan group of senators and Congress folks signed on to a letter calling for executive action on our supply chains. And there's a part of it that caught my attention. They wrote, when we cede our manufacturing power and technological know-how to foreign adversaries, we are hurting our economy, our global competitiveness, American workers, industry, and national security. Government action on this front is long overdue to address the scope and magnitude of these serious risks we face as a country. And I'm going, was this written 10, 15 years ago? Because this ain't new, folks. Would have been nice if you had come up with this epiphany, 17 years ago. Would have saved me a lot of words. And here to share some thoughts on, this grand epiphany in this letter that they've sent President Biden, and maybe where we go from here. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it is great to be with you. And you're right. We've heard this song before, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, clearly I'm being obnoxious here going, hey, welcome to the game. Welcome to the show. We've been saying this for a long time. Better late than never, maybe. But what do we do with this now?
Yeah. So just a bit of background. There's this issue when foreign investment comes into the United States, it's subject to a review under a law called CFIUS, which is CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, to see if it's going to negatively impact domestic industry or national security in some way. Because particularly if you think about it, a state-owned company from somewhere else doesn't have the same cost of capital, doesn't have the same profit motive. If it comes into the U.S. market, it can displace our own producers, and that's going to harm our capabilities down the road. Well, there's another issue as well, unfortunately, and that's when our companies invest overseas. And, and we've talked about this before, a lot of U.S.-based companies have invested in China, and they've handed over the keys. In some cases, they've been stolen from them. In other cases, they've handed them over for a lot of technology that is important to our economic and national security as well. There was legislation to try to have a review of this outbound investment because there is none right now. Pennsylvania's own Senator Bob Casey was one of the authors, along with John Cornyn from Texas and a few others. And we tried to get this done as part of the CHIPS Act, which was going through. Didn't quite make it into that because of there's obviously some multinational companies who oppose this legislation. But it turns out that the administration probably does have some regulatory authority to look at this. And so they're basically saying, look, the legislative vehicle is kind of stalled for the year, but there are things that we can do within the Treasury Department, within the Commerce Department, to take a look at this to see if some of these investments that big companies are making overseas are in fact wise, or do they threaten national security?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about stories over the years of, Chinese companies buying up our companies and U.S. companies going overseas, and as you point out, having their technology stolen or they just give it away. At which point, I have no sympathy for them in either case because they made the choice to go. They had a place where their patents and their intellectual property is well protected. That's right here where they should have stayed. But, we're in this moment where I think coming out of the pandemic where people are finally pulling their head up and asking questions, are some of the investments we're allowing and some of the shifting of manufacturing, is this the right thing at the right time? And I'm glad to see that finally, people are coming around to my way of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's taken a while. But this is a recommendation that the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which was established more than 20 years ago, has been consistently making. Is like it's foolish for us not to review the big investments that our big companies are making in markets like China, where they could spawn competitors against all of us, and we've seen the impact of this, Rick. And so my hope is that we'll find a way forward, and we'll at least get some reviews in place in the near future here.
And my bigger concern is, you get these Chinese firms who come in here and buy up American companies and then behave as if they're American companies, yet they're beholden to the Chinese communist government. And they're making things that are, that are high tech stuff. For instance, we're moving towards a 5G system where the computers are talking to each other. This is the high level stuff where, cars are going to be talking to each other. 80,000 pound trucks are going to be talking to each other at some point. Computer systems across you name it. And yet they're going to be made with Chinese chips and Chinese communication systems. I'm really uncomfortable. And I think most Americans are really uncomfortable with that when you talk about the Chinese Communist government having their fingers in that.
Yeah, that's right. And I want to say this is not because of any anti-China bias. This is strictly a matter of the record of the Chinese Communist Party and the demonstrated lengths that it is willing to go to conduct cyber warfare, cyber espionage, and to embed in technology items that can collect data surreptitiously. This is done on a widespread basis in China, and we also know that technologies have been deployed overseas, including in the United States, aimed at critics or economic competitors or dissidents. And so this is a very, very serious issue, Rick, and we should, and I'm not saying this in a jingoistic way, but just as a matter of fact, it is a mistake to allow products that are made by companies based in China that have a connection to the Chinese government to be part of our communication, our telecommunications, or our cybersecurity infrastructure here in the United States. That could have disastrous consequences.
But here's a question, because during the Trump years, you had this company Huawei, who we were going to ban from doing things here in the U.S. I was all in favor of banning them. They should have no business doing anything on the communication front, given the record in communist China on violations of personal liberties and on security state and the surveillance state that they are. And yet the Trump administration back there kind of gave them a pass.
Yeah. I mean, it's a complicated issue, but you're right. They kind of had a half-baked ban, and it took a long time to get there. But I do think that there is bipartisan recognition now of the danger of all of this, and the challenge that we face is that when this infrastructure, the 5G, is built out. There's a federal interest in it, but it's built by private companies, and these private companies obviously want to make higher margins. And guess what? Huawei and other Chinese companies are willing to sell at a very, very low cost to gain that market access. And so the private sector companies are like, well, this is too good of a deal to pass up, but in the long run, it could do considerable damage, right, again, to the security of our telecommunications and other important infrastructure.
And an example of this is, as I was reading a story today on Apple going to be using some kind of a chip that's made in China, and there's a kind of a pushback. Explain this, because if I'm Apple, do I really want this stuff coming from China? And I know that the Chinese Communist government has an awful lot of power enforcing corporations. And look, you got John Cena to learn Mandarin and apologize for recognizing Taiwan. Right. They've got a lot of power. But if I'm the head of Apple, do I really want that in my product? And if I'm a consumer, do I want to buy an iPhone with a Chinese chip that who knows? Yeah. Or am I being paranoid?
Yeah, you're not being paranoid, Rick. I think you're you're articulating the right amount of concern here. And the issue is this: is like, at the same time that the rest of American industry understands the need to invest in semiconductor manufacturing in the United States and to build it up here, Apple is a lone wolf here. And a few years ago, they indicated to Intel and some of their other vendors that they were going to do their own semiconductor chips. Okay, and obviously Apple's a big customer. And not only that, but they're going to have them manufactured in China. And it is a serious problem because the iPhone, the 14s, the latest ones, may in fact have some of these chips that are manufactured by a state-owned enterprise in China. And I'll admit, I use an Apple product. Unfortunately, the smartphones are made in Asia, and most of them are made in China. But I think there is no possible way that I would buy a phone with a chip like that in it, because there is too much ability for secret data collection. And again, this has been demonstrated that it is possible, and ultimately these companies answer to the Chinese Communist Party. And so, you know, I know some senators wrote to the administration expressing some concerns about this. And so there should be certainly a review of this. And at a minimum, there ought to be limitations placed on government use of these until we get to the bottom of this.
We are most certainly in interesting times. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Scott Paul. He's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. If you want to check out the work that they do. You know, I'm looking at this, and again, you know, as a consumer, there's just so much of this, and we've integrated our system with China so much, and corporate America has, you know, looked to them for cheap, exploitable labor, environmental regulations that are lax, and, you know, basically the heroin that our CEO class has been hooked on. So as consumers, we've just kind of gotten a little lax. So what's the advice for folks? Because I got to tell you, I'm not an Apple person, but, you know, I don't know that the Samsung phone I have is any better.
Right. Yeah, and consumer electronics is probably the most vulnerable category there. Okay, you know, and so I think if you are a consumer and you want to do more, there's a couple of ways to do it. One is to speak with your money. And it is possible. It is not always possible because, again, you can't find an American-made cell phone. It is impossible. so there's no use in doing that right now. But there are a lot of other choices that can be made that will support American industry. And there's a lot of resources on how to do this, including on our website, where we have a directory of companies that are making fantastic products in the United States. The other thing is to use your political voice and to make sure that the candidates that you're supporting understand the importance of Made in America and why it's important for jobs and for sustainability and for a lot of the values that we as Americans hold near and dear to our hearts.
Yep.
And I always let companies know that, you know, if they don't offer an American-made option, how kind of upset I am, especially the companies that wrap themselves around the flag. That really gets me going. The ones that act very patriotic, but in fact make everything overseas, and so holding them accountable is another tool that we have to again make some progress. And I'm just going to say there are signs that we are making progress. Okay. There is more reshoring going on now than there has been for decades. And so I think that we can collectively make a difference here with good policy and with smart choices that we just outlined.
Again, back to sound investment, smart policy. That simple. And as you said, look, and the last area I wanted to get into is the fact that the New York Times had a story yesterday saying, hey, you know, we're creating manufacturing jobs like it's the 1970s again, because those jobs are coming back. And we really haven't seen the effects yet of the Inflation Reduction Act and, you know, the other things that this administration is moving forward on. So for me, I'm like, we're moving in the good direction. We should stay on this path.
Yeah. I think it's great. And it's totally true that Joe Biden is the first president to reclaim all the manufacturing jobs that were lost in the prior recession. That hasn't been done by anybody, Democratic or Republican, again, since like basically the 1970s. And that's before, you're right, that this kind of like turbocharged investment in manufacturing is going to take hold. And you have $1.2 trillion in the infrastructure and jobs. You have hundreds of billions of dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act for clean energy projects. And you have over $300 billion as well in the CHIPS Act, not only for semiconductors, but for other types of advanced manufacturing. And so we're at the very tip of this. And there are some exciting days ahead if we keep these policies in place. But what we don't want to do is elect people to office that are going to turn this back. It would be a huge mistake, and we'd be ceding all of this ground back to China.
Yeah, and there's one of the political parties who's running around saying that they're going to undo all of it, which makes no sense to me. I think we're on a good path to return us to a day of prosperity for working people, broad shared prosperity for working people, by investing in infrastructure, by investing in manufacturing, and talking about strong unions. Rebuilding that economy that my grandparents' generation fought, bled, and died for. I think that's the path forward. And I think come November, we've got a choice to make. But Scott, I appreciate you taking some time for us. As always, great stuff. Keep up the great work.
All right back to you, Rick. Thanks so much for having me on tonight.
Thanks so much. Our good friend Scott Paul, the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website. Love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1903. That was the day that is remembered in Virginia as the wreck of Old 97. Old 97, also known as the Fast Mail, was a Southern Railway freight train. It carried the U.S. mail from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta, Georgia. The train wreck happened on the leg of the trip from Monroe, Virginia to Spencer, North Carolina. The train had come in late to Monroe. It was reported that the railway company ordered the engineer to increase the speed of the train to make up time. The company had to pay a penalty if they delivered the mail late. But when the train neared Danville, Virginia, the tracks curved at the Stillhouse Trestle Bridge. The speed was simply too much. Despite the engineer's efforts to slow the train, it careened off the tracks and plummeted to the rocky ravine 45 feet below. 11 of the 16 people on board the train died, including the conductor, the engineer, and the flagmen and both firemen. The railway company blamed the wreck on the deceased engineer. Newspapers across the country carried photos of the wreck. The disaster became the subject of multiple ballads. One version, by Vernon Dalhart in 1924, is thought to be the first million-selling country record in U.S. history. Johnny Cash recorded another well-known version of the song. In 1993, an alternative country band took the name the Old 97s, hearkening back to the disaster and the songs it inspired.
They gave him his orders at Monroe, Virginia. Said, Steve, you're way behind time. This is not 38, this is old 97. You must put her into Spencer on time.
For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Our quote of the day from Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger from Illinois. He says, look, back before we had all the crazies here, just some crazies. Every vote we took, we somehow defund Obamacare. That's going to look like child's play in terms of what Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to demand of Kevin McCarthy. They're going to demand an impeachment vote on President Biden every week. They're going to demand things like, let's make abortion illegal in all circumstances. And look, they're not even waiting to be in power. In fact, you've got a guy running for governor in my state of Pennsylvania, the fascist Doug Mastriano, the Republican nominee, who back in 2019 did an interview where he talked about, if a woman has an abortion, we charge her with murder. That's if he's elected in this state, that's the goal. Now, the University of Idaho, interesting little. Now, remember, states' rights. Remember, we're not gonna. Well, no, we're just gonna. We're gonna do other things. It's not about taking away other things. It's just about abortion. But the University of Idaho told their employees on Friday that they would be charged with a felony if they talked about abortion, if they talked about it. because that's a new state law, evidently. Talking about it will get you a felony. And they were told that they, quote, could no longer provide birth control, not just Plan B, but any birth control. Again, remember what I said 10 years ago. They're going to come for Roe, and then they're coming for Griswold. Not surprised. Just telling you what's going on. Let's go to the phones real quick. Get Alice on line one. Alice, how are we doing today?
We're doing okay. What I wanted to say was the Republicans, you know, we're going to have all these kids running around. We're going to have old people that don't have any Social Security or Medicare. So I guess we're going to bring back poorhouses, which, if you recall, up to the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, we had poorhouses. And then we had all of these workhouses where they sent the poor old people. We used to have one here in my little rural county, and then they ended up closing it down in the 40s. And then they changed it over to a county-run home for the elderly, and they ended up closing it, I believe, in the early 70s. But I don't think, you know, people are thinking, because do you really want to see Grandma wind up, you know, in the poorhouse for the old
making
folks?
America great again, Alice.
Yeah, hey, cheap labor.
Scary stuff.
Have a good one.
Thanks so much, Alice. And, you know, to highlight her point, you know, my mother worked in one of those nursing homes back in the 70s when I was a kid. It was, you know, it was for the indigent. And those people, they were destitute. They didn't have family come to visit, and you know the staff was underpaid and overworked, and you know it was one of the most, you know, I think back to those days, and you know just it was horrible what we did to people. Now I'll tell you, you know, some of the stories of the people that I met and the stories that they shared with me as a young kid. Because I used to go there after school and wait for my mother to get off work, and I would spend time with these residents, and you know their life stories were just incredible. But you know, you think about just being warehoused in these, and there were 4 or 6 of them in a room. I mean, it was just horrible conditions, and my fear is we're heading back to that. We're heading back to an era where, you know, the rich do very well, and well, the rest of us not so much. But you know, funny story, and I still remember the guy who told me that he was one of 19 kids. And I said, 19 kids? And he goes, yeah. I go, 19 kids? I mean, my mind couldn't wrap around it. And I said, you know, how is that possible? He goes, well, my parents didn't have TV. And you know, it didn't dawn on me until I was much older. Much older. I mean, I was probably 7 or 8 years old when that story happened, but I was much older when I go, oh yeah, I get it. Yeah, maybe I wasn't the brightest 7 or 8 year old. It was a different era. We didn't have the inner tubes back then. But no, it's you know, I don't want to return to those days, because I remember the working conditions, and my mother's working conditions, as bad as they were all those folks' living conditions. And I still remember the smell, and just, we can't go back to that, no matter how much our friends on the right want and fetishize and dream of taking us backwards. Can't do it. Won't do it. Just my thoughts. Love to hear yours. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you get yours, from Stitcher to Podbean, iTunes to iHeart. Wherever you get them, you'll find ours. Amazing stuff.
Our adage is always hide from the wind and run from the water.
Hurricane Ian takes dead aim at Florida.
This is a historic storm for this province. There's no question about that.
Hurricane Fiona was the strongest storm on record to hit Canada. Plus,
fundamental human rights are being violated as we begin measuring climate change, not in degrees of Celsius or tons of carbon, but in human lives.
Pacific Island nations call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty.
All of those hard luck stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
New York City has announced that students will no longer get snow days. Luckily, this isn't too big of a deal. I know it's sad. But you realize, thanks to climate change, New York's getting snow for, 2 years max now?
Sad but true. This is your Green News Report.
By 2026, this is basically going to be Florida with better bagels. That's all it's going to be.
Okay, Desi Doyen, I am really, really worried about the state of Florida today.
And for good reason. We'll get to Florida in a moment. But first, Hurricane Fiona slammed into Puerto Rico last week, and then near-record warm ocean waters gave it the juice it needed to spin all the way up to Canada, pummeling Nova Scotia and setting a new record as the strongest storm to make landfall in Canadian history. Fiona's storm surge washed entire buildings out to sea. Simultaneously, in the Philippines, Super Typhoon Noru shocked forecasters by spinning up from a tropical storm into a dangerous Category 5 cyclone in less than 24 hours, one of the fastest rapid intensification cycles ever recorded on the planet.
And that is saying something because we've seen a lot of these storms in recent years, starting from nothing and spinning up to fives in a matter of a day or two.
Yes, and they give very little time for residents to prepare before the storms strike.
Yep.
Typhoon Noru caused widespread damage and floods, knocking out power for millions in the Philippines and killing at least 5 first responders. And scientists do link the observed increase in rapid intensification to record warm ocean waters caused by man-made global warming. Here in the U.S., as we go to air, Florida residents are racing to prepare for Hurricane Ian, rapidly intensifying in the Caribbean Sea. The National Hurricane Center forecasts Ian will make landfall somewhere on Florida's west coast midweek. Evacuations are underway in some areas. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has declared a state of emergency statewide. The exact location of Ian's landfall and storm surge will be key. Tampa Bay is particularly vulnerable to storm surge. Its shallow bay gives all that water nowhere to go. And the city hasn't seen a hurricane landfall in at least 100 years. Today, it is now heavily developed with many more people in harm's way. Tampa Bay Mayor Jane Castor on CNN warned,
Well, you certainly can replace personal possessions. You can't bring anyone back to life. Mother Nature always wins.
Yeah, she does. Let's hope she takes a pass on Florida this time, but it is not looking good.
In other news, some great news for the fossil fuel industry and utilities. Ratepayers are set to pay much more for fossil energy this winter. Natural gas prices alone have more than doubled this year due to Russia's brutal ongoing invasion of Ukraine, which is causing a global supply crunch. But also, it's thanks to the fossil fuel industry's lobbying over many years to vastly increase exports of U.S.-produced natural gas, which means Americans are now forced to compete with the rest of the world for U.S.-produced supply.
Never mind Mother Nature, fossil fuel industry always wins.
U.S. fossil gas prices are now at the highest levels in well over a decade and are expected to remain high into 2023. Finally, at the annual United Nations General Assembly meeting still underway this week in New York City, world leader after world leader has used their time at the podium to sound the alarm about the climate crisis. But the president of the South Pacific island nation of Vanuatu went even further, calling for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to end production and use of fossil fuels, the first time any country has done so. The agreement would phase out the use of fossil fuels, accelerate safer and cheaper renewable energy, and make ecocide a crime punishable by the International Criminal Court. The president of Vanuatu noted that his country and other developing nations are least responsible for causing man-made climate change, but are getting hit first and worst by rising seas and extreme disasters.
We call for the development of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to face down coal, oil and gas production and enable a global just transition for every worker, community, and nation.
Good luck with that. I mean it. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So one of the things I talk about quite often is how we heal the things that we're forced to be divided over. The wealth class has done an amazing job of slicing and dicing us and pitting us against each other on race and on gender and on orientation. Finding those areas where there's some difference and then, throwing in the red meat so that we're eating each other and, not them. And I keep saying, look, you got to put down the red hat and the blue hat. You got to put down the polarization. This isn't right, left. It is top down. Those people sitting in the ivory tower looking down on all of us, right, left, center, they don't care about us. They care about themselves and their bottom lines. And here to share some thoughts on how we heal those divides, how we move together and make each other's lives that much better. I've asked Beth Howard to come talk with us. She is Rural Kentucky Campaign Director for Showing Up for Racial Justice. Their website, surj.org. They got a fantastic video out on how we come together and why we should come together. Beth, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's great to have you. And I saw the video. I think is fantastic. Because it's a topic that I think we have to figure out how to deal with. We've got our divisions, we've got our differences, but ultimately, if we're gonna heal and unite this country, if we're gonna move forward and make lives better, we got to figure out how to overcome these fault lines.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're really working to do at Showing Up for Racial Justice. We are the largest national organization that's organizing white people into the fight for racial and economic justice. And in particular, we have a commitment and focus on organizing working class white people into this fight. And that's an important thing because, as you were pointing out, the working class in our country have the most to gain by being in true solidarity with each other and building the power of a multiracial working class. And so those at the top want to divide us, and they'll always use race to do that. And so it's very important that, us as working class white people don't take that bait, don't take the divide and conquer tactic of using race to pit us against each other, and instead know that we have so much to gain when we come together. Yeah. And that's how we win the world we deserve.
No, I learned this lesson very young. I mean, I was a young child in the 70s growing up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, in a minority community. I was the only white kid in an all-black neighborhood. We used to play this neat game called Chase the White Kid and beat the snot out of him. Sure, it was a fun game, but I learned very early it wasn't about white and black. It was the only color that mattered was green because we were all broke. And at the end of the month, our cupboards were all bare. It didn't matter white, black, brown, green, orange. People were broke. And for me, all these years, it's been about how do we move forward and make sure that we have policies that help all working people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we get caught, as you were saying, in a lot of red and blue, right? Is this a red state and is it a blue state? And we really have to get away from that because it truly is about who's at the top and the rest of us. And to start to see ourselves as a class. I'm in the great state of Kentucky, and, we have politicians like Mitch McConnell who have used race as a way to promote their agenda, to cut food stamps and food benefits for children, to take our health care away, to beat down unions, to have right to work. And all of that has happened over a long period of time because it's taught to people like me, my community, my family, working class white people. And it tells us to take our suffering and blame other working class people, primarily immigrants, Black folks, right, people of color. So again, so we stay divided. When really, as long as we're fighting each other, they're just making money hand over fist.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's tried and true, tested, for generations, thousands of years, because it seems to always work. We're going to hate the people that we see. And that we have to deal with. And I'm always amazed when you hear people say, there was somebody at the grocery store and they were using an EBT card or they were using food stamps. And I'm going, so you have a problem with that? What about all the corporate welfare that we hand out to these bigwigs who live in these mansions and have 7 homes? What about them? We never talk about that.
Oh, exactly that, and I grew up in rural Eastern Kentucky. My father worked in coal mining and surface, like strip mining. My mother worked at a grocery store and later a factory. We had a small tobacco farm. And, I always say, we had a lot of joyful times and we had a lot of struggles. And those struggles came from living in this country where a handful of people get to be rich and the rest of us suffer. And, it is so interesting how, those in power have gotten people like me or my family, my community, right, working class white people, to side with whiteness and to side with white people who do not have our best interest at heart instead of our class, instead of our Black and brown and other working class white people. And so, you talked about seeing people blame people for having EBT cards, right, and acting like that's shameful. My mentor, Jerome Scott, has told me, and I carry it close to me, and his mentor told him, there's nothing too good for the working class. We deserve it all. And so I really carry that with me doing our work, because I know that the way that we win is that we come together and build working class power.
No, you're right. There is nothing too good, because ultimately we're the ones who do it. And this is the part that, we went through an era where you were talking, where the Republicans were pushing out, the producers versus the parasites. And, that there were these working poor people who were parasites, when the reality is the people who were putting up the big billboards and making these claims were the actual parasites. When you got down to it, they were the ones sucking money out of the system. They were the ones stealing wages and ruining opportunities for working people. It's really interesting how we allow the narrative to get away from us. It's just one of these things. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're with Beth Howard. Beth is the Rural Kentucky Campaign Director for Showing Up for Racial Justice. You can check out their website, surj.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can check out the work that they do. Now, again, this is one of those moments where we're told we have to be at head butts. We have to hate each other. We have to be divided. And, as somebody who's studied labor history, I know that, the wealth class has always used the other. Name the other: blacks, immigrants, women, people with different gender identities, with different sexual orientations, all of that, to break strikes, to cause dissension in the workplace, and ultimately to destroy wages, hours, conditions for working people. So it just seems natural for me as a union guy to go, you know what, we maybe don't do all those things, and we march together, find our common ground, and lead our best life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and fight for what makes all of us better off. That seems logical, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And, a lot of our work, which I would love to invite people into, is that we meet people where they are. So I do a lot of door knocking, right, in rural majority white places. And, we ask people, like, what's going on for you? What's hurting? Like, if you could change something, what would you want to change? And what would you want more of, right? And of course, we'll always hear about economic issues, right? Like, I'm worried about losing my home. I need to put food on the table. There are no good paying jobs that are safe, that pay a living wage, that there are no unions, right? And, time and time again, a lot of times people are just waiting on us to knock on their door, right? They're like, I'm angry. I want something to change. I want to get involved. And I'm so happy to be able to put them right into a campaign or into work. And other people, who might be more conflicted and they're confused, right? Like, I'm suffering in these ways and they're telling me, my landlord's telling me that my rent's going up because of immigrants. And it's up to us to have these conversations to be like, do you think that, the whole apartment building has bed bugs and repairs aren't being made because of your landlord, or is that because of your neighbor? Right. And it is like asking questions to help people see like who is really to blame here.
Yep.
And so I think that's a lot of the work of our organization. And I think one of the things we're doing in Kentucky, a couple campaigns. One is to work to elect Charles Booker for U.S. Senate because we know that he is the candidate for the working class. And another campaign is, in Kentucky, we have an abortion an amendment up for vote to ban abortions in Kentucky. And I think to your point, Rick, this is another, example of an issue that can be a wedge issue to divide the working class. The story of labor and the story of racism is all about bodies and what people can do with their bodies or not.
Yeah.
And what rich people will control and do to exploit people's labor and their bodies.
Yeah, for me, it's simple though, Beth. If you're against abortion, there's a simple solution. Don't have one.
Yeah.
If you're against same-sex marriage, don't do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem difficult to me, but you don't have the right to impose your will on anyone else. My grandfather always said, you have the right to do whatever you want until your right infringes on mine.
Yeah.
And I think we need that kind of a mentality again. But this is one of these moments, and I'm glad you talked a minute ago about knocking on people's doors and talking about issues that are on people's minds, because what we're spoon-fed through our corporate-controlled media is that it's all these fringe issues that people are top of mind, when the reality is it's that ham and egg kitchen table economic stuff. How am I going to put food on the table for my kids, keep a roof over their head? How am I going to save for retirement? What about if my kids get sick or I get sick? These are the things that sadly never get addressed because, well, they keep dividing us on issues that really, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think are all that important.
Absolutely. We are really just like, how can we as white people see what we're calling our shared stake in the fight for racial justice and the fight for the multiracial working class? A lot of times, racism and anti-racism for white people is described as asking white people to give up privilege, right? Or talking about white privilege and saying, as a white person, I'm going to do a favor for Black people or for brown people. And what we're saying is we have a shared stake in racial justice because the fight for our lives is wrapped up in the fight for Black lives, the fight for immigrant lives.
So let me ask you this, because I've had this discussion before, and people say, well, I don't have any white privilege. Yeah. I don't feel this privilege that you speak of. So what do you say to people who look, they're struggling. They're not making it to the end of the month. The paycheck isn't putting food on the table at the end of the month like when I was a kid. They're struggling to keep the rent paid. They're struggling to pay the light bill. They're not seeing the privilege that you're talking about, and yet they're being fed this message that it's so much better for those people, and you can fill in the gap of who those people are, simply to keep us divided. So on the privilege issue, what do you say to people who don't feel that they have this privilege?
Yeah, well, the way we talk about it largely at Surge is that, white privilege might be a fact, but it's not an organizing strategy. Definitely knocking on a door in rural Eastern Kentucky with poor white people, that's a great way to get a door slammed in your face, right? People are suffering and struggling. And, so to me, I frame the conversation of like hearing that they're suffering and not trying to take that from them or have them, pitted against who's suffering worst, right? But to be with them in that pain and to describe what we're doing as not giving up something else that they don't, they feel like they don't have, giving up this privilege that they feel like they don't have, but instead being like, this is how we have so much to gain by doing this work of racial justice and letting that not divide us. That's how we get the things that we need. That's how the working class has all that we deserve and more.
Yeah, just plain justice, really, making sure that everyone has an opportunity and ultimately bringing people together to demand more from our elected leaders so that maybe all of us do better.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many of the poor white people I talk with, they understand that, they're like, yes, if I were Black, I'd be getting pulled over by the police more. And I also know that I'm living in an apartment that is not, fit for my family, and I'm scared about my job, and I need health care, right? All of those things can be true.
Yeah, no, good point. So let me, last line of question I have for you. So if someone wants to get involved and someone wants to help make a difference, what do they do?
Yes. So we are inviting people to join our work around the midterm elections. Our campaign is called Build, Block, and Grow. And so we are, doing our part to pull our country back from escalating into authoritarianism and the brink of fascism. And so, instead of falling into despair, we have got to, show up and fight and build the working class. And so, if you check us out online, show up for RJ on Twitter. Again, our website is surge.org. You can sign up on our list and get in on our campaign. We're doing work in our state in Kentucky around making sure that we vote down the constitutional amendment to ban abortion in our state. We're working to elect Charles Booker. We have work going on in Georgia around the elections. And I could just keep going. And so we would love to have people get involved. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at JBethyJean. That's my childhood nickname, Bethy Jean. And so it's at JBethyIeJean.
All right, we will most certainly do that. And I hope folks will go to the website, surj.org, surge.org. We'll get links out on social media. Beth, I appreciate you taking time for us. Good stuff.
Oh, thank you all so much for inviting me and having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Love to have you back again. You're fantastic. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Wasn't she fabulous? Make sure you check out the website, surj.org. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. Generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Tucker Carlson evidently spoke at a Hell's Angel funeral. And my first thought is, why in the blank is Tucker Carlson speaking at a Hell's Angels funeral? Why is that? And why would they be listening? Why would they be sitting there listening to him spiel on after the death of Ralph Sonny Barger, the longtime president of the Hells Angel Motorcycle Club? Why would he be there? And you go, probably because, well, the powers to be need muscle. And again, there's history there. But I don't know why a pencil neck geek like that would be speaking to that group. I would have thought they would have, never mind. Never. I'm not going there. Not going there. Steve Bannon, the former guy's campaign manager, thrilled by the election of Giorgia Meloni in Italy, becoming the country's first far-right prime minister since, well, Benito Mussolini. He said, quote, "This is the rise of Christian nationalism. You watch. And I got to tell you, I watched her speech. Wow. Her speech at the World Congress of Families. Oh my, wow. Wow. Hitting all the notes, and very, very well. She says, why is the family so threatening? She said, there's an answer: because it defines our identity, because everything that defines us in this time is the enemy to those who would like us not to have an identity anymore, those who wish we were only perfect consumer slaves. She said, therefore, identity is under attack. National identity is under attack. Religious identity is under attack. Gender identity is under attack. Family identity under attack. She says, I must not be able to define myself as Italian, Christian, female, mother. No, I must be citizen X, parent 1, parent 2. I must be a number, because when I am only one number, when I no longer have an identity, when I have no more roots, well, then I will be the perfect slave at the mercy of the great financial speculators. Can't she just say Jew? Because that's what she's saying. This is pure fascism in the worst kind of, this is, well, what Bannon said. This kind of heated rhetoric, and it's coming here. It's going to come here to the U.S. You know it. She goes on to say, we are here to say that we are not numbers. We will defend the value of human person, of each single human, because each of us is unique genetic code that is unrepeatable, and it's sacred. We will defend it. We will defend God, the homeland, and family. Can you just not see, the Nazi salutes and the goose stepping? Can you not just see this? We're in a scary moment because the right-wing movement on this planet is growing. The moneyed interests see an opportunity of grabbing power and moving away from democracy, or moving away from life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And what's interesting is, they're talking about, the identity being under attack, yet you had better fit into the identity that they put forth, the identity that they prescribe. You better be Italian. You better be Christian. You better fall into this frame that they have put in place. And this is scary stuff, because you hear the same kind of nationalist rhetoric right here in this country, folks. And look, this is not the reason I started this radio program. This is not the reason that I got involved in doing radio at all. I'm a labor guy. I want to make lives better. I want people to fight for better wages, hours, conditions. I want, save for retirement. I want kids to do. My life is in the economic world. But when I see this kind of rhetoric, when I see this kind of scary stuff going on, all that other stuff kind of secondary. When you see the kind of divisions that are being thrown up in our way, the roadblocks being thrown up in our way, this is dangerous, scary times. And the reason I think the work that Beth Howard and her group at Surge do, why I think that's so important, is it's going to help us fight back against this kind of stuff. If we can heal our divides, if we can put down our shields, if we can find common ground and move forward in solidarity together, we can defeat this kind of stuff, like my grandparents' generation did. They fought fascism. They fought this kind of nationalistic rhetoric. They fought this kind of thinking. And we were a country that thought it would never come back. We were a country that thought we were smarter, that we were better, that couldn't happen here, couldn't possibly happen here. And yet, well, I'm sure the Italians thought Mussolini was never coming back. And yet we've got people on the ballot in this country right now spewing the same rhetoric. November, make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you plan to vote, and make sure you get out to vote. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You miss any of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Back after this.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1903. That was the day that is remembered in Virginia as the wreck of Old 97. Old 97, also known as the Fast Mail, was a Southern Railway freight train. It carried the U.S. mail from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta, Georgia. The train wreck happened on the leg of the trip from Monroe, Virginia to Spencer, North Carolina. The train had come in late to Monroe. It was reported that the railway company ordered the engineer to increase the speed of the train to make up time. The company had to pay a penalty if they delivered the mail late. But when the train neared Danville, Virginia, the tracks curved at the Stillhouse Trestle Bridge. The speed was simply too much. Despite the engineer's efforts to slow the train, it careened off the tracks and plummeted to the rocky ravine 45 feet below. 11 of the 16 people on board the train died, including the conductor, the engineer, and the flagmen and both firemen. The railway company blamed the wreck on the deceased engineer. Newspapers across the country carried photos of the wreck. The disaster became the subject of multiple ballads. One version, by Vernon Dalhart in 1924, is thought to be the first million-selling country record in U.S. history. Johnny Cash recorded another well-known version of the song. In 1993, an alternative country band took the name the Old 97s, hearkening back to the disaster and the songs it inspired.
They gave him his orders at Monroe, Virginia. Said, Steve, you're way behind time. This is not 38, this is old 97. You must put her into Spencer on time.
For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
It's been a record year of runaway wealth for America's billionaires, with this tiny clique vastly widening the chasm separating them from us hoi polloi. For example, Amazon Hefe Jeff Bezos hauled in $190 billion for the year. That pays him more than $360,000 a minute for every single minute of the year. So much taken by so few, who do so little while harming so many. Bezos erected his corporate empire on the backs of non-union workers he routinely exploits, plus millions of taxpayers he bilks. Indeed, his recent surge of wealth comes not from innovation or hard work, but from the windfall of bloated Wall Street stock prices, making him richer without lifting a finger. Yet, media and politicians hail Jeff as a big-thinking genius. Seriously? This self-centered ego's top achievement this year was to have the world's largest super yacht built for him, a 400-foot-long seagoing palace. But, oops, Jeff's pleasure craft can't get to the ocean because it's too tall to go under a bridge just downriver from the Dutch city where he's having it built. No problem for a billionaire genius, though. Boss Bezos simply instructed local officials to dismantle their historic bridge so his toy could pass through. But no go, for outraged locals learned of his imperious scheme and quickly organized a massive rotten egg brigade, pledging to pelt the colossal yacht and possibly Jeff. Very bad political optics. So the American mogul's billions were not allowed to buy his way out. This is Jim Hightower saying, it's still unclear how he'll get it out to sea, but one Dutch wag helpfully pointed out to him, you can still take your giant boat out for short trips down to the bridge and back. If these mega-rich privileged ones are so smart, why are they so stupid?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
One 416 Rick. 1-866-416-7425. Thoughts, questions, comments, something on your mind. Let me know. Also, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So Ron DeSantis, privately, evidently calling Trump a moron. And has vented about Trump running for president. And, I got to tell you, with Hurricane Ian, bearing down on Florida, there's part of me that goes, thank goodness Joe Biden's in the White House. There's a big part of me, there's a huge part of me that goes, thank goodness Joe Biden's in the White House. But can you imagine in this moment if Donald Trump, who, thin-skinned, vindictive, was in the White House now with the hurricane bearing down on the people of Florida, with DeSantis, famously here calling him a moron and looking at running in 2024. Can you imagine the repercussion? This is why, again, thank goodness Joe Biden's in the White House, because I guarantee you, when Florida needs something, they're going to get it out of this president, because he's there to do a job, regardless of who voted for him. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to be. I got an email from George who pointed out that Texas is the nation's leader in book banning. He heard my spiel on the girls coding ban here in Central York School District in our neck of the woods. Pennsylvania way up on the list of book banners. But George very clear saying that Texas is by far and away the number one book banning state. And his comment was, Texans don't read. They shoot books. Interesting. Also, Ken Paxton, this is ironic, the Attorney General from Texas evidently fled his home in a truck driven by his wife, like a criminal, to avoid being served with a subpoena yesterday. And this is one of those things where you go, hold on, how long did you think you were going to dodge this there, Ken? Look, these people, the laws, the rules, they don't apply to them. Just doesn't apply. And this is one of those moments where, Wednesday, when the January 6th committee has their next hearing, and I'm looking forward to it. And I'm going to have the popcorn like everybody else. I've got time blocked out in my day to make sure that we're front and center, got a good screen position, because I think this could be, some more good information to hold people accountable. And this is what we should want. We're part of the reason that we're doing this tour that we're kicking off on Friday is to go have the kind of conversations that Beth Howard was talking about. The kind of conversations of the things that unite us, that draw us together. And I think accountability is something that all of us want, no matter which T-shirt you bought or which hat. Did you buy the red hat or the blue hat? I think people want that. And what's interesting is every time I bring up the January 6th hearings to my MAGA hat wearing, Trump supporting friends, they always go, well, but. And I'm going, there are no well buts. There are no, but Hillarys or but Obamas or but Clintons. There's this. Deal with this. We've dealt with that stuff. That's in the past. This is the future. And let's talk about how we ensure that this stuff doesn't happen anymore. That we hold elected officials accountable, that we have a system that's transparent, accountable, and that we figure out how to heal our divides at least well enough that we can talk to each other. The sad reality is, and this is where, the Trump era created this environment. I used to have people I disagreed with that we would have conversations with. In the workplace, socially, that's pretty much stopped. Discussions have gotten angrier, have gotten more violent, more dug in. And while we're doing this, while we've picked our team, the stuff that Beth was talking about doesn't get addressed. Because invariably, when you talk to people about what's really important to them, outside of the nonsense pollsters who pose questions in a certain way that elicits the response that they want, when you get working people to say, hey, what's important to you? Jobs, food on the table, roof over the head, paying the bills, future for the kids. education, healthcare. These are the issues. And, I point to my Democratic friends and go, look, that's what you should be running on. Extremely aggressive policies to make those things better. I had someone go, well, the Democrats, they're all socialists. I'm going, you don't know what a socialist is. The organizing of the past, the socialists of the past, the communists of the past, they were radicals. Today, we got a lot of very reasonable leftists, a lot of very reasonable communists. Maybe too reasonable. We need people who are going to start demanding better. And this is the kind of moment that we're in. And I'm hoping as we see strikes expanding and as we're on this road trip, every strike that we can get to, we're going to roll up and we're going to interview people. And you know what? I'm gonna bet. Now again, we haven't even begun this yet, but I'm gonna bet when we roll up into that picket line, I'm gonna bet my last dollar. I don't hear anyone talking about same-sex marriage or abortion or transgender this or that or book banning or any of the things that we've been force-fed to think that those are the really important issues, because they're really not. They're not germane to the vast majority of our lives. You know what really matters? The job. The wealth that our job creates that helps support our families. The opportunities that our kids get. And I've said this a bunch of times. I used to believe that, we all wanted the same things. We all wanted the same destination. We all wanted that American dream that I grew up believing possible. And that I've been fortunate enough to be able to live, and I want the next generation to be able to live. But I'll tell you, I'm looking at some of the scary stuff going on. And my Republican friends, please look at your party in this moment. Look at some of the rhetoric coming out of the mouths of these people and the massive change that they want to make. They want to create an environment that has never been, but in their head. I want to take us to a period where we all follow our paths, lead our best lives, move forward, prosper, but do it in a way that has dignity and respect. This idea that if I win, you have to lose, I don't agree with this. So when I see this administration talking about we're going to end hunger, we're going to end childhood hunger in 8 years, I'm on board. And I think the vast majority of people outside of my conservative friends who don't believe any government program is good and that we should leave this to the churches because they've done such a great job to this point, I don't think people are offended by the idea of government action to end hunger, because I believe government is what we use to do the things collectively we can't individually do. Building roads, educating a populace, and I would argue healthcare. There is a way forward for us. And the sooner we come together, the sooner we stand together and demand together, maybe some of those issues that Beth was talking about, some of those issues that when Beth knocks on a door, people bring up to her, maybe that gets addressed. Why is it? Why is it that the things that people bring up that are really important, and again, jobs, income, being able to pay the bills, roof over the head, food on the table, healthcare, education, all that's, why is that doesn't get addressed? Why don't we get that? But tax cuts for the very wealthy, boy, we get that every day and twice on Sunday. Tax breaks for corporations, well, they'll do that too. We'll literally take food out of the mouths of children to give corporate America another tax break. Because, well, they're going to create jobs. They were going to do it anyway. It's a false choice, right? And this is where I keep coming back to, we can organize, we can come together, we can demand better. And we're seeing it happen. And I've got great hope in this moment. I got great hope as we embark on this tour that we're going to find people who are going to talk about what's really important. And we're going to go into these communities that are sadly hollowed out shells of their once prosperous selves. And we're going to hear the stories of how things used to be. We're going to hear the stories of how things broke down and why they broke down. Stories of struggle and pain. And hopefully, and this is where my optimism comes in, hopefully we're going to hear some stories of, hey, we're changing things. We're making lives better. I know, it's hard. It's hard when everything that we're being force-fed. And I pay attention to the corporate-controlled mainstream media. I pay attention to the F channel and all of the corporate mouthpieces who, they do their clickbaiting just to keep us angry and ticked off at each other, and so that we're focused on each other instead of on, well, them. And I'm saying, now's the time that we put down those barriers. I look at what, the Stand Up for Racial Justice group. And as someone who studies labor history, I started thinking about today as I was preparing to talk with Beth. I was thinking about Tennessee. Tennessee used to have a least convict program, back 90 years ago, where if a black person was convicted of vagrancy, they were just standing around. They'd lock them up. They'd sentence them to, long 6-month prison sentence. But hey, if you went to go work for the state, we'd lease you out, and you'd be able to make a little bit of money, and the state would make a little bit of money, and it would be a good deal for you. And what they would do is they would use you to go break the white people's strikes, to stoke that tension, to stoke that anger, to be able to visually keep them at each other's throats, so that they didn't look at each other and go, hey, you know what? We're both being screwed by the same people. Maybe we should not be opposite each other. Maybe we should be joining together and going after the people who are incarcerating these black people to be used against these folks on their picket line. And maybe we should get jobs for people to ensure that they can support themselves. Maybe we grow economic and political power to throw these bums out. That's how democracy is supposed to work. But the wealth class has figured out, since they've got all the money, that they need to divide and conquer us, that they need to keep us pitted against each other, so that we have narrow self-interests, radical self-interests. It's all about me. And this is what the Reagan era brought us. The Reagan era brought us this hooray for me and the heck with everybody else mentality. Greed is good. The one who dies with the most toys wins. And what it did is it broke up that joiner generation that my grandparents were. The people who joined bowling leagues and joined their union softball teams and went to union meetings and had their weddings and their funerals and their family events at the union hall, as well as the churches, where community was front and center. Togetherness was front and center, and you did this on an economic basis. What the right has learned is you give people, this unity, but you do it in a way that segregates us and narrowly defines who we are. And don't talk about economics. Don't talk about the things that could possibly bring us together. No, can't have that. Because you can't divide and conquer that. And it's been amazing how the right has used religion as a divider, when it should be something that unites us, should be something that calls us to be our better selves, calls us to a higher power. Yet they've perverted it. Now it's all about the prosperity gospel. As when I grew up, it was all about social justice. It was all about peace. Now it's about who gets more. Everyone can be a millionaire. Everyone's going to be rich. Yet that book that says, rich people, a rich guy's got a harder time of getting into heaven than a camel going through the eye of a needle, or however that quote goes. Never mind the words. This is where we need to be uniting. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Also, on the tour, by all means, want to hear your thoughts on the places we should go, and I hope you'll come and see us in the cities where we're going to be banging around. We will have lists at thericksmithshow.com of where we've been, where we're going, and how you can get in touch with us. Really looking forward to hitting the road and getting out and meeting and greeting and, well, beginning to change the world. Quick break, right back.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1909. That was the day the International Lady Garment Workers Union began a strike against the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. Eventually, female workers struck at 339 of the 352 shirtwaist manufacturing firms in New York City. The strike was referred to as the Uprising of 20,000. Women comprised 70% of all garment workers. Men performed the higher paid work of cutting and pressing, while women earned less for assembling and finishing garments. Women often had to furnish their own supplies, including needles, thread, and even sewing machines. Some firms locked the doors to each floor. The workers, mostly young girls and women, had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. While the strike initially started at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, it soon spread to other factories. At a meeting of garment workers in November, a young girl, Clara Lemlich, called for a general strike. One day later, 15,000 shirtwaist workers walked out of the factories, with more joining the strike the following day. The strike continued until February 1910 and ended with factory owners agreeing to meet the demands of the workers, which included better pay and shorter hours. This strike was a notable achievement for these mostly immigrant working women. Nevertheless, garment workers after the 1909 strike continued to suffer harsh working conditions. A year later, many workers died in the tragic Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire. The fact that the company locked the doors on each floor meant that the workers had no means of escaping the blaze. Today, it's very difficult to find clothing that is union made. We must work together to restore labor unions to protect the safety of those who make our clothing, both in the United States and throughout the world. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Marianne sent me an email asking about what's going on in Chicago. Evidently, she pointed out that she asked my opinion if I think this is a good idea, bad idea, and sent this article saying that 95% of Democrats oppose policies that favor releasing violent criminals. And look, when you phrase it like that, are you in favor of releasing violent criminals back into society? I'm surprised it's only 95%. Because you go, should we let murderers go? And you go, no, we shouldn't. No. But when you then start to talk about what the issue really is, and this is what the right is really good at, scaring people into thinking that somehow we're just going to open up the doors and let all the violent people go. In Illinois, one of the things that they're doing is they're ending cash bail. And understand, if you've ever been accused of a crime in this country, I know this is hard to believe, but in this country, we are innocent. You've heard it before, and maybe once you've tripped over it. Innocent until proven guilty. You have the right, the Constitution gives you the right to bail.
That's there. It's in writing. It's simple. Now the folks in Illinois have passed the Safe T Act, which would allow some people who are charged with crimes to get out on bail. Whereas in the past, they would have to come up with a whole boatload of cash, secured. Now, understand what that's meant to do. It's meant to, ensure their appearance in court. Now, what they're saying is, well, they're just going to be released without anything. There's going to be no hearings, no nothing. And I'm going, no, that's not quite how this works. They're going to begin the process, and instead of having the hearing right at the beginning, figuring out how much it's going to cost to get you to come back, they're not going to assign a cash bail. I mean, there's going to be some parameters where they're going to ensure that you're going to come back. And if the state can prove that you're a flight risk, maybe you don't get out. But it's this kind of scary stuff that Republicans bring up every election season because we got to scare white people against the dark people who they commit crimes. We've got to scare people to think Democrats are weak on crime. And the reality is I don't think that they're weak on crime. I think they're just a little more humane. And like I said, I've known people who have been accused of crimes and they get their day in court. Now, fortunately for them, they had the resources to put up the cash bail so that they could go home. Explain to me the difference in going, well, you're going to put up a little bit of cash so you can then go home. And if you're poor, well, you get to sit in jail. I think of the guy in Philadelphia, and this is where this thing pops into my head. There was a guy in Philadelphia who stole 3 peppermint patties. 3. What's that, $1.50? He spent 500 days waiting for a trial date. 500 days sitting in jail, waiting for a trial date. Couldn't make bond. Couldn't make bail. And you go, what sense does this make? Now, can we argue that some of the crimes maybe we can discuss because they're saying second-degree murder is something that's on here? Again, this goes before a judge. A judge then makes that decision. The way they make this sound is, no, they're just going to arrest them and then let them go. It's a catch and release, kind of like they were claiming that the Democrats were doing on immigration. And I love that kind of that fear and all of that they throw out because it's all they've got. Sorry, voting America. All the Republicans bring to the table is scaring the bejeebus out of you, so that you'll go, oh, I'm afraid of the scary people. I don't care about my economic security. I don't care about my rights. I don't care about anything. I just want to be safe. How many times you heard that nonsense? Because around every corner, there's a boogeyman, according to my conservative friends. And we need a good, strong man like the former guy. How many times have I heard my conservative friends say that the border is wide open? People just waltz right across. And yet, that's not even remote. We spend billions of dollars a year on border security. Billions. The number of people, monitoring our border has more than doubled over the last 2 decades. But the frame is it's wide open. People are just waltzing across. Drugs are flowing across. When the reality is the drugs that are coming into this country are brought in by who? Well, us, citizens, in legal ports of entry. But we can't talk about that because, well, that would screw up the narrative. It would completely blow the right-wing narrative and the fear and smear out of the water. I hope that answers the question. It is my thought, and I'd love to hear yours. You got something on this? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do share. Also, if you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Or if you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. And, if you got a Trump friend, maybe share the podcast. They may learn something. Thanks so much for being here. Looking forward to the beginning of the tour. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.